Somewhere in the deserts of southeastern Iran, a satellite once measured the temperature of the ground itself at nearly 89 degrees Celsius. That number describes the surface, the scorched skin of the earth, not the air a person would breathe standing there, and even with that careful distinction it sounds almost impossible. Yet Iran seems built out of places that constantly demand a second sentence of explanation. Here, in the middle of waterless plains, people made ice for centuries without a single wire of electricity. A forest grows straight out of salt water. Salt itself slides down a mountainside as slowly and surely as a glacier. Clay windmills keep turning in the wind hundreds of years after the hands that shaped them fell still. On one map you find natural wonders, ancient engineering and architecture that changes its face as the sun moves across the sky. The closer you look at this country, the more it feels as though reality here is competing with imagination and winning. What follows is a journey through real places, each one with coordinates you could stand on, a history you could read, and an explanation that only deepens the strangeness rather than dissolving it. The journey begins in Shiraz, a city of gardens, poetry, and old walled quarters. Early in the morning, when the streets are still nearly empty, the first low rays of sunlight pass through the stained glass of the Nasir al-Mulk Mosque. In an instant, the prayer hall fills with pools of pink, blue, yellow, and green light. They spill across the carpets, climb the columns, and drift over the walls, turning the whole room into an enormous kaleidoscope. This is why the mosque is known around the world simply as the Pink Mosque. But its famous color does not come from the glass alone. Inside and out, the walls are covered in Qajar-era tiles, unusually rich in soft rose tones, a palette rarely seen in traditional Iranian mosque design. The building was commissioned by a powerful Qajar nobleman, Mirza Hassan Ali, who held the title Nasir al-Mulk. Construction stretched across roughly 12 years, from the late 1870s to the late 1880s. The architect, Mohammad Hassan Memar, blended the late Qajar style with intricate vaulted honeycombs of plaster, concave niches, and an abundance of colored glass. The complex covers something in the region of 2,000 square meters, and since the middle of the 20th century, it has been part of Iran's National Heritage Register. The most important thing about this mosque is that its miracle does not last. The stained glass is tuned to the angle of the morning sun. For a few hours, the hall blazes as though its walls had dissolved, and then the sun climbs higher, the colored patches fade, and the space becomes once again a beautiful old room and nothing more. That is why people arrive before dawn. They are not waiting for the doors to open. They are waiting for the exact moment when architecture, glass, and sunlight line up. From Shiraz, the road runs far to the south, toward the Persian Gulf, where handmade beauty gives way to geology. Off the coast of Hormozgan province, not far from the port of Bandar Abbas, lies the island of Hormuz. People call it the Rainbow Island, the goddess of salt, even the edible mountain. The ground here can be red, yellow, white, or ochre, and after rain or heavy surf, the sea along the shore turns for a while a thick and startling red. Hormuz is a salt dome. Ancient marine deposits of salt were buried long ago beneath heavier rock, but salt is lighter than the stone around it and can rise, agonizingly slowly, through cracks and weaknesses. Over millions of years, it pushed a mixture of salts, carbonates, and volcanic rock up toward the surface. A high content of iron oxide, mostly the mineral hematite, gave part of the soil its deep red tone. Local people call this ochre gelak and have long used it as a pigment and sometimes even as a food additive. That is where the striking phrase about earth you can eat comes from. Of course, the whole island is not edible. Only certain mineral mixtures are consumed in small amounts and with care. But even without exaggeration, Hormuz looks as though someone scattered powders of dozens of colors across the shoreline. The island's geological story reaches back something like 600 million years, though it rose above the sea far more recently, perhaps around 50,000 years ago. The moving salt carved out caves, folds, towers, and strange flowing shapes. When rain washes the iron-rich soil into the water, the red tide looks alarming, even as the explanation behind it stays entirely ordinary. Hormuz is a reminder of how slowly stone can move, and how alive something can seem when we had always assumed it was still. But even a Red Sea and edible ochre pale beside the Iranian desert of Dasht-e-Lut, a name that can be translated as the empty plain. It lies in the southeast of the country, between the provinces of Kerman and Sistan and Baluchistan, and it counts among the harshest regions on the planet. In the mid-2000s, satellite readings caught a surface temperature here of around 70 degrees Celsius. Later analysis of data gathered across roughly a decade pushed the record higher still, to nearly 89 degrees at the surface. The reason for such heat is a combination of conditions. The dark ground, in places almost coated in volcanic material, drinks in solar energy with particular greed. The desert sits in a basin ringed by mountains, and the air stagnates there. It is worth repeating that this is the temperature of the surface, not the temperature of the air at the height of a standing person. Even so, the Earth can grow so hot that our ordinary idea of heat simply stops working. In the mid-2010s, Dasht-e-Lut became the first natural site in Iran to be added to the UNESCO World Heritage List. It is especially known for its kalutes, giant ridges and towers sculpted by the wind. Some of them rise more than 200 meters, and the dune fields to the southeast climb close to 300. From a distance, the kalutes look like the streets and blocks of a ruined city, which is why the stretch of desert near Shahdad is called the Ghost City. For thousands of years, the wind has carved corridors, walls, and lone towers into the ground, leaving behind a landscape you could easily mistake for the remains of some unknown civilization. Dasht-e-Lut covers tens of thousands of square kilometers. It seems impossible that anything could live here, yet that impression too is deceptive. In its salty channels, scientists have found microorganisms able to survive extreme drying, heavy salinity, and significant doses of radiation. Even in a place that looks finally and completely dead, there are forms of life that have adapted right up to the edge of what is possible. It is precisely next to deserts like this that you see most clearly how inventive the people living in Iran were, long before any modern machinery arrived. In a country where summer air can rise well above 40 degrees Celsius, structures existed for centuries that could produce and store ice without electricity. They were called yakhchals, which means ice pits. A yakhchal looked like a massive clay dome standing over a deep underground chamber. Water arrived through qanats, ancient underground channels, into shallow pools set beside a tall wall. The wall shielded the water from the daytime sun. On a clear winter night, that thin layer of water gave up its heat to the cold sky and froze. The ice was broken, carried down into the underground store, and stacked in layers, sometimes packed with straw so the pieces would not fuse into a single block. The thick walls were built from a mixture of clay, sand, lime, egg white, and other additives, producing a material with excellent insulation. The dome worked as a chimney. Warm air rose and escaped, while the cold air settled and stayed below. Some of these structures reached almost 20 meters in height. Extra cooling came from badgirs, the wind catcher towers that funneled moving air down into the building. The difference between the temperature outside and inside could be 15 or even 20 degrees. Ice like this was used to chill drinks, preserve food, and prepare traditional desserts. Today, most yakhchals no longer work for their original purpose, but engineers keep studying how they were built. This ancient technology, resting on the movement of air, on evaporation, on the way heat radiates away into the night, and on the properties of the earth, has unexpectedly become a hint for modern, low-energy architecture. In a world trying to cut its consumption of electricity, the buildings of the desert have suddenly become relevant again. From dry heat, the path carries us to the sea, and there, too, Iran breaks the ordinary logic. Near the island of Keshem, the largest island in the Persian Gulf, a forest grows directly in salt water. These are the Hara mangroves, formed by gray mangrove trees. They stand in the zone of the tides and, twice a day, partly vanish beneath the water. At high tide, only the crowns show above the surface, and at low tide the roots in the muddy floor are laid bare. The largest of Iran's mangrove stretches spreads across something like 2,400 hectares. It sits in the Quran Strait, between Keshem and the mainland, and holds the status of a UNESCO biosphere reserve. This ecosystem endures under high salinity, fierce heat, and very little rainfall. The mangroves filter salt, hold the soil in place, serve as a nursery for fish and shrimp, and offer refuge to a great many birds. Their leaves are even used as fodder for livestock, compared in nutritional value to barley and alfalfa. So this forest, which spends much of its time standing in the sea, feeds not only the creatures of the water, but the herds on the shore as well. After a forest that lives by the clock of the tides, it is worth traveling to a place where time is measured in thousands of years. In Kerman province, not far from the town of Shahr-e-Babak, lies the village of Maymand. Its houses are carved directly into the soft rock. This is not a museum backdrop or an abandoned complex. Some of the rooms are still lived in today. The people of Maymand have traditionally followed a semi-nomadic way of life. Across the seasons they move between pastures, temporary shelters, and their winter homes cut into the stone. UNESCO singles out how unusual this system is, because it is not only the herds that move, but the families themselves, shifting where they live according to the time of year. Carved into the rock are roughly 350 houses and as many as 2,500 separate chambers. The rooms are small, usually without windows or chimneys, with a hearth in the center. Ceilings often stand no higher than 2 meters, and individual living spaces run somewhere between 16 and 20 square meters. Soot from generations of fires has coated the walls in a dark layer, and at the same time hardened the surface of the stone. Maymand is sometimes described as a village 12,000 years old, but that claim needs care. Traces of human presence in the surrounding area may reach back that far, in the form of rock carvings and scattered finds. The continuously inhabited settlement itself is usually estimated at 2,000 or 3,000 years. In the mid-2000s, the cultural landscape received a UNESCO prize named after Melina Mercouri, and a decade later it was inscribed on the World Heritage List. Today, some of the cave chambers have been turned into guest rooms and small cafes, but the real value of Maymand lies not in tourism, but in the living bond between a natural landscape and a way of life. From the mountain village, the road returns toward Shiraz. A few dozen kilometers from the city lies Lake Maharlu. In the dry season, it changes color and turns pink, sometimes almost red. From a distance, it looks as though paint had been poured into the water, but the color is the work of living things. Maharlu is a shallow, closed salt lake, whose surface area swings dramatically with rainfall and evaporation. It sits at an altitude of around 1,500 meters and is ringed by mountains. Water reaches it through seasonal rivers and then slowly evaporates away. As the volume of water shrinks, the salinity climbs, and conditions become just right for microorganisms able to live where most other species would die. One of the leading roles belongs to a microscopic alga, a salt-loving species of Dunaliella. To protect itself from the intense sunlight and the extreme salinity, it produces carotenoids, among them beta-carotene, which stains the water in shades of pink and red. Living alongside it are salt-loving archaea and bacteria. So the color is not created by a single organism but by a whole community, and the palette shifts through the year. In one season, the lake may be almost pink, in another duller or even bluish. Shiraz, it turns out, has 2 pink wonders. One is made by Qajar-stained glass in the Nasir al-Mulk Mosque, the other by microscopic cells in salt water. One exists for a few morning hours, the other depends on heat, evaporation, and the turning of the seasons. Dozens of kilometers separate them, yet both are reminders that color, in nature and in architecture alike, is often born only when conditions line up precisely. Farther north, in Mazandaran province, water builds not a color but a staircase of stone. Badab-e-Surt is a cascade of terraces grown from mineral springs. They lie in the mountains at an altitude of about 1,800 meters. Water saturated with minerals rises to the surface, cools, and lays down travertine layer by layer. Over thousands of years, this has formed steps and shallow basins that glow in yellow, orange, and reddish tones. Two different springs are at work here. One is highly salty and does not freeze in winter. The water of the other has a sour taste and carries iron compounds that tint its deposits rust and red. The name Badab comes from Persian words meaning carbonated or gas-rich water, while Sirte goes back to an old name for the district. Tourist descriptions often call Badab-e-Sirte the second site of its kind in the world after Pamukkale in Turkey, but no strict international ranking of such places actually exists. The same caution applies to the stories of the water's healing powers. Local beliefs connect the springs with cures for rheumatism, skin conditions, and migraines. But this belongs to folk tradition rather than to any proven medical fact. The true wonder here needs no embellishment anyway. Water slowly building stone, adding to the terraces one delicate layer at a time. If at Badab-e-Sirte nature spent thousands of years constructing something, then at the other end of the country one of the largest human structures ever built from earth was destroyed in a matter of minutes. Argi Bam is a vast clay citadel in Kerman province. Its walls, towers, houses, barracks, bazaar, stables, and the ruler's residence formed an entire city inside the fortifications. The complex covered around 180,000 square meters. Walls several meters high ran for close to 2 kilometers. They were built from mud brick, rammed earth, and traditional mixtures. The roots of the settlement reached deep into antiquity, and Bam flourished in the early medieval period, when the city stood on trade routes and was famous for its textiles. Its life, like the life of so many cities of the Iranian desert, depended on qanats, those underground waterways. On the morning of the 26th of December in the year 2003, an earthquake with a magnitude of roughly 6.5 all but destroyed Bam. Tens of thousands of people died, and tens of thousands more were injured or left without homes. Most of the historic citadel collapsed. For an architecture of clay that had stood for centuries, a few minutes became a catastrophe. Recovery began almost at once. Iranian specialists took part alongside organizations from abroad. Japan helped create a detailed three-dimensional model of the citadel, and other countries supported the conservation work. In the mid-2000s, Bam was placed on the UNESCO World Heritage List and, at the same moment, recognized as a site in danger. Some years later, its condition was judged stable enough to remove it from that endangered list, though the restoration continues to this day. Argi Bam is a reminder that even the most massive structures made of earth remain part of the very geology that once gave rise to them. In the southwest of Iran, in the Zagros Mountains, the earth once again reveals how it can flow. There stands the salt dome of Jashak, an enormous ridge roughly 12 kilometers long. People call it the Salt Mountain. Inside it and across its surface you find caves, large crystals, white streams, and what are known as salt glaciers. Salt, under great pressure, can slowly deform and flow. It rises from the depths, breaks through to the surface, and creeps down the slopes, forming shapes that resemble frozen waterfalls and tongues of ice. This process is called halikinesis. In its nature, Jashak is a cousin of the island of Hormuz. Both were born from the upward push of ancient salt layers. Across the south of Iran there are dozens of such domes, but Jashak stands out for its scale and the variety of its forms. In spring, when the humidity is higher, the salt waterfalls and crystals become especially vivid. And yet the common claim that the world's longest salt cave is found here is simply not true. That record belongs to a different Iranian salt dome on the island of Keshm. Jashak has no need of a borrowed record. The sight of a mountain slowly flowing under its own weight is strange enough on its own. The last place on this journey ties deep antiquity not to ruins, but to a working machine. In the northeast of Iran, close to the border with Afghanistan, stands the town of Nakhchivan. Above it rises a long wall of clay windmills. They are called asbads. These are vertical axis structures made of clay, straw, and wood. Unlike the familiar European windmill, their sails turn not in a vertical plane, but around a vertical axis. The buildings form a high protective row and, at the same time, harness the strong and steady wind of Sistan. This flow is often called the wind of 120 days, because in the warm season it blows for weeks on end with almost no pause. In Nakhchivan, around 30 mills survive, some reaching 15 or 20 meters in height. Inside, the moving air passes through chambers, pushes the wooden blades, and drives the millstones. Estimates of the building's age vary widely. Some sources speak of roughly 1,000 years, while others place the surviving structures in a later era and give them a few centuries. The technology of vertical windmills, meanwhile, has been known in the region for far longer, and many researchers consider Iran one of the places where it was born. Today, the greatest threat to these mills has nothing to do with the wind or with crumbling clay. It is the disappearance of knowledge. One of the keepers of the complex, Ali Mohammed Etibari, has spoken of how hard it is to find a student. Modern machines long ago replaced hand milling. Young people have little wish to master the heavy craft, and without constant repair, the clay walls and wooden mechanisms slowly fall apart. The mills can still turn, but there may soon be no one left nearby who knows how to bring them back to life after the next breakdown. And in this lies the shared secret of all these places. Not one of them is hidden behind some mythical boundary or exists only in legend. Each has coordinates, a history, a scientific explanation, and a protected status. But the explanation does not make them any less astonishing. The pink light in the mosque still vanishes by noon. The red earth of Hormuz still stains the sea. The Lut Desert still heats to its extreme. Ice still survives in the Yakhchal amid the blaze of summer. The mangrove forest still slips beneath the salt water. People still live inside the rock. Microorganisms still paint the lake. Water still builds its steps of stone. The clay city still rises after the earthquake. Salt still flows down the mountain, and the ancient mills still turn in the wind. Iran does not hide the impossible. It has simply gathered too much of the extraordinary onto a single map. Almost everything here can be seen with your own eyes, touched with your own hand, and explained by the laws of nature or by human engineering. And yet, once the explanation is given, what remains is the very feeling people set out on journeys to find. Wonder at a world far stranger and richer than it ever appears from far away.